Hey Techno Studs, let's take a look at some equipment. I have a few switches here that we'll take a look at, and then I'll pull up a router and we'll take a look at the router. So the first thing that you should notice with these switches is that all three of them, and we'll take a look at three different switches here, are 48 port switches. So all three are 48 port switches. So what this typically would be found is on a rack. You would have these switches all mounted onto a rack, and then you'd have patch cables. And those patch cables would plug in to these different ports right here. And then the other end would plug into either some sort of equipment or into the jacks that are going to go out to your users if this is an access switch. So we would plug in these ports into the different equipment that we had. So right above this connector, we have different lights, and so the lights can tell us different information on it, such as the usage or the speed or different connection types. So we can gather different information from there. We can actually toggle through that different information by pressing the button here on the right-hand side. So as I press that, there's a few different LEDs and different ones light up, and so that will select the different modes in which the display, what the LED displays and what it means. And then on the other side here, we have ports on here that would be our link ports to, let's say, other switches. So this might be a link to another switch, possibly a server. But anyways, these are our main connections there we're establishing with other equipment. And so when we take a look at this, they would probably be a higher speed with this. And there are two. There's the RJ45 connectors here, or we could use a GBIC connector, which is something that would slide in here and give it some additional functionality. For instance, let's say if we wanted to use fiber optics. So let's say we wanted to run from one switch to another switch, we could slide in a GBIC into here and then connect the two switches using fiber optics. So we'll take a look at also what that looks like when we actually get on the equipment and see things on the equipment. So this is a 2960 that we have right here. It's a managed switch. I'm going to flip it around and we'll take a look at the back, and we see a few things on the back. One thing that we see here is the power supply. So the power would plug into here, or if we had some DC power, we could input it into here and power this device through DC power. Typically, you would see this unless you had some other setups on your racks in there. And then over here is where the console port is. So the console is going to be where we connect into this using our PC and start programming it. And then right here you can see kind of a little grid right there, an opening into the chassis. That's where this device is venting out. So the fan is right there, and so it's going to blow all that hot air out. All right, let's take a look at our next switch here. I'm going to set this aside. And then on our next switch here, same thing, we see 48 ports. We see our GBICs here that we can add some additional functionality over here. We actually see 4 different ones on this particular one. And then we have the same button that we press right here with the LEDs here and the LEDs across here that displays our different information regarding the different ports. So there's one LED right here per port, and then a row of LEDs here that gives us different statuses of this machine and the mode in which it's displaying with these LEDs across here. Let's take a look at our third switch. This is a 3750. Our third switch is also 3750. However, we've got a few more features. Actually, before I switch to that one, I'll flip this around and I'm going to show you that it has a special connector type in the back, and that's called a StackWise. And these 3750s are amazing switches. And you can then use a separate cable to connect the different switches, the back planes of the switches together for a much faster connection. So we see that. We also have a console port across here. Can't see it very well from my angle right here, but we've got a console port, we got power, some of the same things that we saw on the other switch. Okay, I'm going to set this aside and let's take a look at the third switch. So this 3750 is a little bit different, a little bit bigger. Both the 3750s have power over Ethernet, so it can power things like phones. We have the same ports across here with the LEDs across here. We also have the display on the mode that it's displaying is vertical rather than horizontal, and our button is across here on the top. And then this is an actual place that we can slide in some additional functionality, slide in a little card into there and have some additional functionality. What really makes this interesting, though, is what we see if we turn this around and take a look at the back. Because this one is a much higher end switch. It's able to deliver a lot more power to it, and it's also able to swap things out. There's hot swappable items on here in case something goes down. For instance, the power. So this is the power right here, and I can slide one of these power out here. I've got two, so it's got redundancy involved with it. I can slide one of these out and replace it with a new one in case one of the power goes out, or same thing, I can slide out the fan. This is a fan unit. I can slide that out and replace the fan unit. Have the console port up here and the ConnectWise again to connect from switch to switch. So there are some switches and the hardware involved in the switches. All right, this is an 1800 series router. These routers typically have a much cleaner look to it, have a lot less ports to it, where a switch is designed to connect into lots of other devices. A router, it has a more a specific purpose involved with it that requires a lot less ports. So we don't see any ports across the front, so we flip it around and we take a look at the back. And the back, we have a power switch on this. What's interesting, if you notice, the switches didn't have power switches. You just plugged them into power and they turned on, versus we actually have a switch to turn this on and off. We've got a power port right here. We've got our ports right here that we can configure. Two of them are fast Ethernet here for connecting into things. We've got a T1 type connector in here. Both these ports right here are cards that you can slide in. So I've got this card populated and this card is not. So if I wanted some additional functionality, I could slide in a card into here to give it some additional functionality. Or if I didn't want the T1, I could slide the T1 out and slide a different card into here. One of the cards might have additional ports that I could turn into switch ports, or possibly I turn into more router ports depending on my needs for that. I have the console port right here. This also has an auxiliary. So what the auxiliary is for is if this is in some sort of remote location and the router goes down and it's not, I can't necessarily console into it because I don't have something connected to the console, and I can't, since the router is down, I can't actually get to it through SSH. And so may have some sort of other device modem or something connected into this to get into this and do some administration on it. And then one other thing that this one actually has some additional memory that's loaded into it. So a flash card here that can be put into it to have some additional memory on this device. So this is a router and how a router is set up.